Chapter 1. A Quiet Day on Coruscant. The night was calm above the endless lights of Coruscant. The hum of speeders outside the apartment windows had dulled to a soft background murmur, like waves lapping on a faraway shore. Inside, the light was low and golden, spilling across tangled sheets and the curve of two figures nestled close together. Anakin lay on his back, one arm wrapped securely around Padme as she rested her head on his chest. Her hair spilled across him like silk, and her fingers idly traced the faint ridges of his scarred hand. The room was warm, faintly scented with Nabooian jasmine oil, her favorite. It was late, long after their duties had ended for the day. They had both returned home exhausted. Padme from a marathon Senate session, and Anakin from a long day of patrol and negotiation in the Outer Rim. But now, in the hush of night, there was only stillness. Padme sighed softly, her voice muffled against his chest. Today felt longer than a Coruscant day cycle should legally be. Anakin chuckled, his chest rumbling beneath her. You say that every night. Well, maybe every day feels longer when you spend half of it trying to convince men twice your age that compassion isn't weakness. He turned slightly, pressing a kiss into her hair. You always win, though. I can feel it in the Force when you're speaking. You make them believe in something. Padme smiled faintly. You're biased. Completely, he admitted, but that doesn't make me wrong. They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the muted hum of the city. Padme eventually tilted her head to look up at him, eyes soft in the dim light. Anakin, do you ever wonder what our lives would be like if things were different? He looked down at her, brushing a stray curl from her face. Different how? If there wasn't a war, if you weren't a Jedi general, and I wasn't a senator trying to patch together a republic that keeps tearing at the seams. Anakin's expression softened. Every day, he admitted. Sometimes I imagine us living back on Naboo. By the lake, maybe. A small house. No politics. No orders. Just peace. Padme smiled wistfully. And a garden. Of course, Anakin said, smiling. You'd make me plant one. I'd spend half the time trying to use the Force to do the digging, and you'd scold me for cheating. She laughed quietly, the sound like a melody. I would, and you'd never learn. Probably not. They both smiled at the thought, sinking deeper under the covers. The soft glow of Coruscant's skyline illuminated their faces faintly. Padme's voice grew gentler. And maybe we'd have children. A little boy with your eyes, a little girl with your smile. Anakin's hand tightened gently around her. I'd like that, he murmured. I'd teach them how to fly, and you'd teach them how to be kind. Padme reached up and brushed his cheek with her fingertips. Someday, she whispered. Someday, he agreed, kissing her forehead. The two fell silent again, the weight of the galaxy momentarily forgotten. Eventually, Padme's breathing slowed, her body relaxing fully against his. Anakin stayed awake a little longer, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of her chest before sleep claimed him too. The next morning, the chrono on the bedside table flickered quietly in the darkness. 0457. Anakin blinked awake, instinct pulling him from sleep as softly as the dawn. He turned his head and smiled faintly. Padme was still asleep, one hand curled over his tunic, her hair strewn across the pillow like dark silk. He hated this part, leaving before the sun rose. But duty rarely cared about comfort. Leaning close, he pressed a kiss to her temple. Padme, he whispered softly. Angel, I have to go. She stirred, groaning softly as she tried to burrow deeper under the covers. Stay. I wish I could, he murmured with a smile. Her eyes fluttered open, still half asleep. Just 5 more minutes, she mumbled, tugging on his arm to pull him back. He laughed quietly. If I stay 5 minutes, I'll stay forever. That doesn't sound so bad, she countered, voice muffled against the pillow. He brushed her hair back gently. You know I'd rather be here with you. I know. She sighed, finally opening her eyes fully. Be careful out there. Always am, he said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Padme smiled sleepily. That's a lie, Skywalker. Then I'll try to make it true, he replied, grinning as he kissed her one last time. She watched him go, her eyes heavy with sleep, until the sound of the door sliding shut faded. Then she rolled back onto her side, clutching his pillow close, and drifted back into slumber. An hour later, the city was already alive when Padme finally woke again. The soft morning light spilled through the blinds, painting stripes across the room. She stretched languidly, savoring the faint warmth left in the sheets. Her morning routine was precise, comforting. She showered quickly, tying her hair into a neat bun before donning a deep burgundy gown trimmed with gold. Professional, but elegant. In the kitchen, she made herself a light breakfast. A bowl of fresh Meiluran fruit, some toasted sweetbread from Naboo, and a cup of steaming calf. She stood by the window as she ate, watching the sun climb between the towers. The air outside was tinted rose gold, and for a moment, she imagined she was watching dawn over Lake Country again. Then, with a sigh, she gathered her things and left for the Senate. At the Senate, the day unfolded in a rhythm of debate and negotiation. Padme sat in her pod as the chancellor's voice droned through the chamber, senators floating in and out of their sectors like restless birds. She spoke firmly on a proposal to increase humanitarian aid to the Outer Rim, her words clear and passionate. The war has ended, she reminded them, but our duty to rebuild must not. By midday, she met with Bail Organa and Mon Mothma for a private discussion about trade legislation and the rising tension in certain sectors. They shared lunch together, spiced Meiluran stew and flatbread, while quietly debating policy, occasionally sharing weary smiles over shared frustrations. Padme worked through the afternoon, her mind sharp even as fatigue settled in. When the Senate finally adjourned for the day, she returned home as the city lights began to bloom again. That evening, when the door opened that night, she was already setting the table. The aroma of roasted Nuna filled the air. Anakin stepped in, tired but smiling, shedding his cloak and gloves. "Smells amazing," he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Did I mention you're the best part of my day?" "You might have mentioned it once or twice," she teased, setting down a bottle of Naboo red wine. They ate together at the small dining table, city lights glittering beyond the window. Their conversation drifted between light and serious, Anakin recounting a near disaster involving a malfunctioning starfighter, Padme talking about another senator's long-winded speech. "Do you ever wonder," Anakin said after a sip of wine, "if anyone actually listens in those sessions?" Padme laughed. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone's even awake," he grinned. "Maybe you should start using Jedi mind tricks." "I think I'll stick to diplomacy," she said, smiling. As the night went on, the wine flowed more freely, and the edges of their laughter softened. Anakin told exaggerated stories from the temple. Padme teased him about his dramatic flair, and soon both were laughing so hard they could barely speak. At some point, Anakin pulled out a deck of colorful cards from the drawer. "Care for a rematch?" Padme raised an eyebrow. "You're still bragging about the last game." "That's because I won the last game." "We'll see about that." They sat cross-legged on the couch, the city skyline gleaming behind them as the game began. "Blue," Anakin declared smugly, tossing down a card. Padme countered without hesitation. "Yellow, reverse." He groaned dramatically. "You're ruthless." "I learned from the best," she said sweetly. But luck, or perhaps the Force, was on Anakin's side tonight. Near the end, he grinned as he placed a draw 4 card onto the pile. Padme glared at him, reaching for the deck. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I dare," he said, eyes twinkling. She drew the 4 cards with mock indignation. "You're insufferable." "I'm strategic," he corrected, throwing down his last card with a triumphant shout. "Uno!" Padme groaned, collapsing back into the couch. "You are way too proud of yourself for this." Anakin laughed, reaching over to pull her close again. "What can I say? Victory is sweet." Padme rolled her eyes but smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her hair. "But you love me anyway." She sighed contentedly, the faint hum of the city wrapping around them. "Unfortunately for me," she murmured, smiling. The night lingered in gentle laughter and warmth. The war, the politics, the galaxy all fading away for a while. Just 2 souls, tangled together in the quiet peace they'd always dreamed of. End of chapter 1.